Pastor David Chen stands in his luxury office at Elevation Life Church at 11:47 p.m., looking at attendance charts showing 15,000 people every Sunday, feeling successful, anointed, blessed. 48 years old, senior pastor of the fastest-growing megachurch in Houston, best-selling author, conference speaker, six-figure salary plus housing and expenses. He's built an empire for God, or so he tells himself. But when impossible cold fills his office and divine light materializes, Jesus Christ appears, and he's holding a shepherd's staff. Between them, a vision forms that makes David's heart stop. The empty chairs in his massive sanctuary, transforming to show the real people sitting there, a suicidal teenager he never discipled, an addicted man he never counseled, a grieving widow he never visited, dozens of desperate souls he never actually shepherded because he was too busy building his brand. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, Jesus says, his voice heavy with sorrow. But you don't know them. You know their attendance numbers, their giving records, their social media engagement. But you don't know their names, their suffering, their desperate need for a real shepherd. You built a crowd. I asked you to feed my sheep. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, pause this video. I'm putting resources in the description that could save a life. The American megachurch movement has produced incredible buildings, massive crowds, influential leaders, and impressive budgets. But it's also produced something troubling. Pastors who are better CEOs than shepherds, who know how to grow crowds but not how to care for souls, who can preach to thousands but can't disciple individuals. This is the story of one such pastor, David Chen, who built Elevation Life Church from 200 people to 15,000 inches 10 years, who wrote 3 best-selling books, who spoke at conferences worldwide, who had a social media following of 400,000, who earned $250,000 annually plus benefits, who by every worldly measure was incredibly successful, but who couldn't name 20 people in his congregation, who never did hospital visits delegated to pastoral care staff, who never met with struggling members, had a counseling department for that, who preached inspiring messages but never followed up with actual discipleship, who built an entertainment empire but neglected the actual work of shepherding, knowing the sheep, feeding the sheep, protecting the sheep, caring for the sheep. David Chen was 48 years old, married to Michelle for 22 years, father of 3 teenagers. He'd started Elevation Life Church 18 years ago with a vision: reach the unchurched, build a contemporary church, create an environment where people felt comfortable exploring faith. That vision succeeded beyond his dreams. The church grew exponentially. They built a $40 million facility with state-of-the-art sound, lights, video, comfortable seating, coffee bar, bookstore. Sunday services were production-level quality professional worship team, engaging sermon with video illustrations, compelling stories, practical messages. People came, thousands of people. The church became known as the place to go in Houston, trendy, relevant, non-judgmental, inspiring. But something was missing: discipleship, real spiritual formation, deep relationships, actual, pastoral care. The things Jesus commanded: feed my sheep, care for my flock, know them by name, lay down your life for them. David was too busy being successful to actually shepherd, too focused on growth numbers to notice the hurting people, too committed to his brand to invest in individual souls. He'd become a Christian celebrity, not a shepherd. And on the 28th of November 2023, after David had finished reviewing the most successful year in Elevation Life's history, Jesus Christ appeared in his office. Not to congratulate him on the impressive numbers, but to show him what it looks like when you build a crowd but abandon the sheep, when you create an empire but neglect the souls, when you become famous for ministry but fail at actual ministry. This is a story about the difference between being successful and being faithful, about megachurch culture versus biblical shepherding, about a pastor who achieved everything the world values while failing at what Jesus commanded. And it's about how Jesus confronts shepherds who abandon his sheep for personal glory. David Chen grew up in a traditional Chinese immigrant family in California. His parents weren't Christian, they were Buddhist, but David encountered Jesus at a Christian summer camp when he was 15. The conversion was dramatic, genuine, life-changing. David gave his life to Christ and immediately felt called to ministry. His parents were devastated. Ministry wasn't a respectable career in their culture. They wanted David to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, but David was adamant. God had called him to preach. He attended a Christian college, then seminary, graduating with a Master of Divinity at age 26. His first ministry position was as youth pastor at a traditional Baptist church. David was good at it, energetic, charismatic, able to connect with teenagers, but he chafed under the traditional structure, the hymns, the formal liturgy, the resistance to change. David had a vision for something different, contemporary, relevant, culturally engaged church that would reach people who'd never attend traditional services. At age 30, David left the Baptist church to plant Elevation Life Church. He and Michelle, newly married, moved to Houston with $10,000 in savings and a dream. They rented a school cafeteria for Sunday services, started with 20 people, mostly friends and family. Those early years were hard but beautiful. David knew every person by name. He did hospital visits, counseling sessions, discipleship meetings. When someone had a crisis, David was there, not delegating to staff, but personally present. The church was small, but it was a real community. David was a real shepherd. The church grew, 50 people, 100, 200. David was a gifted preacher, engaging, relevant, funny, inspiring. His messages connected. People invited friends. The church kept growing. At 300 people, they moved from the school to a rented warehouse they renovated. At 500, they hired their first staff member, a worship leader. At 800, they added a children's pastor. The growth continued. David was thrilled. He saw growth as evidence of God's blessing. The bigger the church, the more people being reached, the more God was pleased. Growth became his metric for success, and he was succeeding. By year 5, Elevation Life had 2,000 people attending. They'd purchased land and built a 3,000-seat auditorium. Services were professional. David had invested in quality, sound, lights, video production. The worship team was excellent. The children's ministry was impressive. Everything communicated. We're serious about reaching people. David's preaching evolved. He studied successful megachurch pastors, Andy Stanley, Rick Warren, Craig Groeschel. He learned their techniques. Start with a story. Make it relevant. Keep it practical. Use video clips. End with clear application. His sermons became more polished, more engaging, more effective at keeping attention, and people kept coming. By year 7, they had 5,000 people. By year 10, 10,000. By year 15, 15,000 people every Sunday across 3 services. David had built a megachurch empire. He was invited to speak at conferences about church growth. He wrote books about reaching the unchurched, all bestsellers in Christian circles. He had a podcast with 50,000 weekly listeners. He was recognized everywhere he went in Houston. He was successful, famous, influential. His salary reflected his success, $250,000 annually, plus housing allowance, plus travel expenses, plus book royalties. He and Michelle lived in a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. Their kids attended private Christian schools. They vacationed in Europe. David wore designer suits, drove a luxury car, enjoyed the financial fruits of his successful ministry, and he believed he deserved it. He worked 80-hour weeks building the church. He was responsible for a multi-million-dollar budget and 150 staff members. He preached 3 services every Sunday plus special events. He was exhausted, stressed, constantly busy. The financial blessings felt like fair compensation for the sacrifice, but something had changed from those early years. David no longer knew his congregation. With 15,000 attendees, that was impossible. He couldn't name more than a few dozen people. Most of the congregation didn't know him either, just saw him on stage, polished and professional, delivering inspiring messages. David didn't do hospital visits anymore. Too many people, too little time, and he had pastoral care staff for that. He didn't do counseling. The church had licensed counselors. He didn't disciple individuals. They had small group leaders for that. David's role had become CEO and lead communicator, preaching and vision casting, leading staff, managing growth. He told himself this was necessary. You can't shepherd 15,000 people personally. You have to delegate. Focus on your unique contribution, vision, and preaching. Let others handle pastoral care. But the truth was simpler. David had stopped being a shepherd and become a celebrity. He loved the stage, the applause, the recognition. He loved seeing thousands of people respond to his sermons. He loved being known, respected, successful. He'd built an empire, but he'd abandoned the sheep. The problems weren't obvious. Elevation Life Church looked successful by every metric. Growing attendance, increasing budget, multiple locations being planned, staff expansion. Everything suggested health and vitality. But beneath the impressive surface, people were suffering without real pastoral care. Tyler Harrison was 16 years old, sitting in Elevation Life's youth ministry every Wednesday night. He'd been attending for 2 years, came with his parents who were regular Sunday attendees. Tyler was depressed. Clinically, he'd been cutting himself for 6 months, contemplating suicide for 3. He desperately needed help. The youth ministry at Elevation Life was excellent by most standards: fun games, relevant talks, contemporary worship. But it was big. 400 teenagers. The youth pastor knew maybe 40 of them by name. Tyler wasn't one of them. Tyler had tried reaching out, had emailed the church's general contact. "I'm struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. Can I talk to someone?" He'd received an auto-response with a list of Christian counseling referrals. No personal follow-up, no one checking on him. He'd approached one of the small group leaders after youth group. "I'm really struggling. I need to talk to someone." The leader, a well-meaning volunteer, had said, "I'll pray for you, man. Have you tried talking to your parents?" Tyler had nodded and walked away. The leader never followed up. Tyler had even tried emailing. Pastor David directly found his email on the church website. "Pastor David, I love your sermons. They've helped me a lot, but I'm really struggling with depression, and I don't know what to do. Can we talk?" David had never seen the email. His assistant screened all messages. Pastoral counseling requests were forwarded to the counseling department. David never knew Tyler existed. 3 months after trying to reach out, Tyler attempted suicide, overdosed on his mother's prescription medications. He survived barely and was hospitalized. When the youth pastor heard about it, he visited Tyler in the hospital. "We're praying for you, Tyler. God loves you. We're here for you." But Tyler knew the truth. The church wasn't there for him. He'd tried reaching out multiple times. No one had responded personally. The church was great at producing Sunday services, but terrible at actually caring for suffering souls.
Before we continue, if you believe in second chances and the power of faith, type "restore" in the comments right now. Let your voice be the spark of hope for a family in need. Show the world your faith in action.
Angela Martinez was 32 years old, single mother of 2, secretly addicted to prescription painkillers. She attended Elevation Life regularly, 8:30 service every Sunday, before anyone she knew was awake, so she could hide her deteriorating condition. She loved Pastor David's sermons. They were encouraging, hopeful, inspiring, but they never went deep enough to address her actual struggle. The messages were about having your best life, pursuing God's purpose, living with joy. Nothing about addiction, nothing about suffering, nothing about the dark night of the soul. Angela had tried attending a women's small group once. Everyone seemed perfect: happy marriages, successful careers, well-behaved children, together lives. She couldn't relate, couldn't be honest about her struggles, left feeling more isolated than before. She'd called the church office. "I need help with addiction. Do you have any resources?" The receptionist had given her information about a Christian recovery program at a different church. No personal connection, no follow-up, no shepherd checking on a wounded sheep. Angela's addiction worsened. She lost her job, nearly lost custody of her kids, hit absolute bottom. And through it all, she attended Elevation Life every Sunday, sat in the massive auditorium, sang the worship songs, listened to inspiring messages, and left completely alone, unreached, unshepherded. No one at the church knew her name. No one knew she was suffering. No one checked on her absence when she finally stopped coming after hitting rock bottom. Margaret Foster was 73 years old. She'd attended Elevation Life with her husband Robert for 8 years, since the church was at 3,000 people. They'd loved the contemporary worship, the relevant preaching, the welcoming environment. Robert died suddenly of a heart attack in April. Margaret was devastated. 52 years of marriage, gone in an instant. She'd called the church the day after Robert died, asked if Pastor David could do the funeral. Was told Pastor David's schedule was full, he only did funerals for staff and elders. But one of the associate pastors would be happy to help. The associate pastor who conducted Robert's funeral was kind but didn't know Robert, had never met him. Read generic platitudes from note cards Margaret had provided. It felt impersonal, hollow. After the funeral, no one from the church followed up. No visits, no calls, no meals. Margaret was part of a small group, but it had 15 people, and they'd only met a few times. No real relationships formed. Margaret spent the months after Robert's death alone, grieving, wondering why the church she'd attended for 8 years felt so absent in her greatest need. She kept attending Sunday services, sitting in the massive auditorium, surrounded by thousands of people, completely alone. Pastor David preached inspiring messages about God's faithfulness and hope, but he had no idea Margaret existed, no idea she was grieving, no idea a widow in his congregation desperately needed a shepherd. Eventually, Margaret stopped attending. No one noticed, no one called. She just disappeared, one of thousands of anonymous attendees in a massive church. Jason, the doubting believer Jason Wu, was 28 years old, had grown up Christian, attended Elevation Life for 3 years. He was struggling with significant doubts about his faith, intellectual questions about Scripture's reliability, suffering and evil, exclusive truth claims. He'd tried bringing up these questions in his small group. The leader, a well-meaning banker with no theological training, had given shallow answers. You just need to have faith. Don't question God. Trust the Bible. Jason had emailed the church, asking if Pastor David did discipleship meetings where he could discuss doubts. Was told Pastor David's schedule didn't allow for individual meetings, but they had a Q&A session at the monthly membership class he could attend. Jason attended the membership class. There were 80 people. The Q&A was superficial logistics, questions about serving, baptism procedures, nothing substantive about faith struggles. Jason's doubts grew. He started listening to atheist podcasts, reading skeptical books. His faith was eroding. He desperately needed a mature believer to walk with him, answer questions, disciple him through doubts. But Elevation Life Church, for all its resources and staff, had no mechanism for that. No one shepherding him personally. No pastor who knew him well enough to notice he was drifting. No discipleship process beyond attending services and joining a small group. After 6 months, Jason stopped believing, became an atheist, left the church. No one from Elevation Life ever reached out. No one noticed he was gone. These stories, Tyler, Angela, Margaret, Jason, were not isolated. They were patterns repeated throughout Elevation Life's congregation. Thousands of people attending services, sitting in the crowd, but not actually being shepherded. The church was excellent at Sunday production, but terrible at the actual work of pastoral ministry. Knowing the sheep, feeding the sheep, caring for the wounded, seeking the lost, discipling believers, walking with people through suffering. David didn't see this. He saw attendance numbers, 15,000 people every Sunday. He saw giving $25 million annual budget. He saw growth planning additional locations. By every metric he tracked, the church was wildly successful. But he wasn't tracking the metrics Jesus cared about. Are the sheep being fed? Are the wounded being cared for? Are the lost being sought? Are disciples being made? David had built a crowd. Jesus asked for shepherding. David had created an empire. Jesus asked for faithfulness to individual souls. November 2023 marked Elevation Life Church's most successful year ever. David sat in his office reviewing the year-end reports with his executive team. Attendance was up 12%. Average weekly attendance had hit 15,200. Easter Sunday had broken records with 28,000 people across all services and locations. Christmas was projected to exceed 30,000. Giving was up 15%. The church had brought in $27 million, exceeding budget projections. They'd been able to expand staff, upgrade facilities, and still put $3 million in reserves. Salvations were up. According to response cards from altar calls, 2,400 people had prayed to receive Christ. Baptisms were at 800, double from 5 years ago. Small group participation was up. They now had 400 small groups with approximately 4,500 people involved, 30% of the congregation. Social media engagement was incredible. David's personal accounts had grown to 400,000 followers. The church's Instagram had 150,000 followers. Their sermon podcast was in the top Christian podcasts on Apple. David's books were selling well. His latest, Elevate Your Faith, Living with Purpose, had been on the Christian bestsellers list for 8 weeks. By every measurable metric, Elevation Life Church was succeeding, growing, thriving, making an impact. David's executive team congratulated him. "This has been an incredible year. God is really blessing this ministry. You're doing an amazing job leading us." David felt pride. Not spiritual pride, he'd tell himself, but legitimate satisfaction at work done well. He'd built something significant. He was being a good steward of the calling God had given him. That evening, David prepared his year-end message to the congregation. He'd highlight the statistics, the growth, the salvations, the impact. He'd thank people for their generosity. He'd cast vision for next year, additional locations, expanded programs, continued growth. The message was inspiring, positive, forward-focused. People would leave excited about being part of such a successful church. But nowhere in David's review of the year did he consider, how many people in our congregation are suffering without pastoral care? How many are slipping through the cracks? How many are anonymous attendees with desperate needs we're not meeting? How many are leaving because they can't find real community or discipleship? David didn't ask these questions because he didn't think in those categories. Success was numbers, impact was attendance, ministry effectiveness was growth. He'd completely lost sight of what Jesus actually commanded shepherds to do. At 11:47 p.m. on November 28, David was still in his office. He often worked late, less distraction, time to prepare sermons, catch up on emails, review reports. He'd just finished reviewing the year-end statistics one more time, feeling satisfied, blessed, successful. God had been faithful. The ministry was flourishing. Everything David had prayed for was happening. He walked to the window overlooking the massive auditorium, empty now, lights off, seats vacant. But on Sunday it would be full again, thousands of people, worshiping, hearing God's word, being inspired. David felt good about his ministry. He was doing what God called him to do, building the church, reaching people, making a difference. He'd sacrificed a lot, 80-hour work weeks, time away from family, constant pressure, criticism from people who thought the church was too contemporary or too big or too something. But the results justified the sacrifice. Lives were being changed. The kingdom was advancing. God was pleased. Or so David thought. The temperature in his office dropped 40 degrees in an instant. The cold was sudden and overwhelming. David's breath became visible in his climate-controlled office. Frost formed on the window where he'd been looking at his empty auditorium. David turned around, confused, and saw something impossible. Golden light emanated from the corner of his office. Not from any source, just light existing, growing, taking form. The light coalesced into a figure, a man in simple white robes that glowed from within. He was holding a shepherd's staff, carved wood, worn from use, authentic. And David knew immediately, not because of the staff, because of the presence, the authority, the love and holiness radiating simultaneously. Jesus Christ stood in Pastor David Chen's office, and he wasn't smiling. David's heart stopped. Jesus, the Jesus, here, in his office. His first thought was pride. Jesus came to commend me on the successful year, to encourage me, to affirm the ministry. But the look on Jesus's face wasn't affirmation. It was sorrow, deep, profound sorrow. "Pastor David Chen," Jesus said, his voice filling the entire office despite being spoken softly. "Shepherd of Elevation Life Church, builder of crowds, creator of impressive Sunday productions, author of best-selling books, and the man who doesn't know my sheep." David felt defensive immediately. "Lord, I preach to 15,000 people every week. I've written books that have helped hundreds of thousands. I've built a church that reaches the unchurched. I'm doing your work." "Stop," Jesus interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority. You're about to list your accomplishments, your attendance numbers, your baptisms, your social media followers, your impressive facilities, as if any of that matters to me. But Lord, we're growing, we're reaching people, we're making disciples, you're making attendees, Jesus said firmly. You're creating consumers, you're building a crowd that comes for entertaining services, but receives no real shepherding. David, do you know the names of the people in your congregation? I can't know all 15,000, David started. Can you name 20? Jesus asked pointedly. 20 people who attend your church regularly, not staff members, not elders, not donors, regular people, sheep in your flock. Can you name them? David's mind raced. He could name his executive team, his elders, major donors, people who'd been there from the beginning. But regular attendees? Anonymous faces in the crowd? He couldn't. I have thousands of people, David said desperately. It's not possible to know them all personally. That's why we have small groups, pastoral care staff, systems. I asked if you could name 20, Jesus said, his voice heavy with disappointment. And you can't. David, I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep by name. I know them individually. I care for each one personally. I gave you the privilege of being an under-shepherd, and you've delegated that calling away so you could be famous. That's not fair, David protested. I work 80 hours a week. I preach 3 services every Sunday. I've sacrificed everything for this ministry. You've sacrificed everything for your brand, Jesus corrected, for your reputation, for growing your platform. But you haven't sacrificed anything for actual shepherding. David, when was the last time you visited someone in the hospital? When was the last time you counseled a struggling believer? When was the last time you personally discipled someone? When was the last time you knew a sheep well enough to notice they were suffering? David had no answer. Those things weren't part of his role anymore. He delegated them, necessarily, to focus on his unique contribution. Let me show you something, Jesus said, and gestured toward the window. The view changed. David's empty auditorium filled with a vision, not people sitting in seats watching a service, but the actual spiritual reality of his congregation.
If this moment is touching your heart, share your story or a prayer request in the comments below. Someone watching may need the encouragement only you can give. Tag a friend who could use this message of hope today.
The vision showed David his church, but not as he'd been seeing it, not attendance numbers and growth statistics, but as Jesus saw it, individual souls, each one precious, many of them desperately hurting. The vision focused on Tyler, the suicidal teenager David had never met. Jesus showed David Tyler's desperate attempts to reach out, the emails to the church that were handled by automated systems, the attempts to connect with youth leaders who were overwhelmed, the direct email to David that his assistant filtered out. David watched Tyler sitting alone in the massive youth group, surrounded by 400 teenagers but completely isolated. Heard Tyler's prayer, Jesus, I'm so alone, I need help. Why won't anyone at church see me? David watched Tyler's suicide attempt, the overdose, the hospital, the youth pastor's well-meaning but inadequate visit, and Jesus said, this sheep was in your flock, under your care, desperately crying out for help, and you never knew he existed, because you were too busy with your sermon preparation and conference speaking to actually know your sheep. I didn't know, David said desperately. We have systems, you have systems that prevent you from having to actually shepherd, Jesus interrupted. Tyler emailed you directly, begging for help. Your assistant filtered it to a department. You never saw it, because you've insulated yourself from the actual needs of the flock. The vision shifted to Angela, the addicted single mom David had never met. Jesus showed David her Sunday morning routine, arriving early, sitting alone, listening to inspiring messages that never addressed her actual suffering, leaving still trapped in addiction. David watched Angela call the church asking for help with addiction, heard the receptionist give information about a program at a different church, no personal follow-up, no shepherd reaching out to a suffering sheep. He watched Angela's life spiral, losing her job, nearly losing her kids, hitting rock bottom, all while attending his church every week, sitting in his services, hearing his inspiring messages about victory and purpose while dying inside. And Jesus said, "This sheep sat in your auditorium for 3 years, in desperate need, and you never knew her name, never checked on her, never offered personal help, because your church is organized for crowd management, not soul care. We have resources for addiction," David protested. "Recovery programs, counseling, referrals. You have information," Jesus said. "You don't have relationship." Angela didn't need a referral. She needed a shepherd who knew her, cared about her personally, walked with her through the darkness. But you were too busy being a celebrity to actually shepherd. The vision shifted to Margaret, the grieving widow David had never met. Jesus showed David Robert's sudden death, Margaret's desperate call to the church, being told Pastor David only did funerals for staff and elders. David watched the impersonal funeral conducted by an associate pastor who didn't know Robert, watched Margaret sitting alone in her grief, waiting for pastoral care that never came, watched her gradually stop attending, invisible and forgotten. And Jesus said, James 1:27 says, "Pure and undefiled religion before God is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress." Margaret was a widow in your congregation for 8 years. Her husband died, and you never visited her, never called her, never even knew she existed, because you've redefined pastoral ministry as preaching to crowds rather than caring for individuals. "I can't visit every widow," David said desperately. "We have pastoral care staff. You can't visit every widow because you prioritize empire building over shepherding," Jesus said firmly. Early church pastors knew their congregations, visited the sick, cared for widows, knew sheep by name. Your church is too big for you to actually shepherd, which means it's too big, David. You've built something I never asked you to build. The vision shifted to Jason, the doubting believer, who'd asked for discipleship and been given membership class information. Jesus showed David Jason's intellectual and spiritual struggles, his attempts to get real discipleship, the shallow answers from well-meaning but untrained small group leaders. David watched Jason's faith erode, watched him drift toward atheism, watched him eventually leave the church, not backsliding in rebellion, but genuinely convinced Christianity wasn't true. And no one from Elevation Life ever reached out. No shepherd noticed the sheep was lost. And Jesus said, "I gave pastors to the church to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ according to Ephesians 4. Jason needed equipping, needed discipleship, needed a shepherd who would walk with him through doubts. But your church is organized for inspiration, not formation. You give motivational messages. You don't make disciples. We have small groups," David protested. "We encourage people to get connected. You have volunteers with no training trying to do the work you were called to do," Jesus said. "Small groups led by well-meaning people who can't handle serious questions. You've outsourced discipleship so you could focus on stage presence. And sheep like Jason are lost because of it." The vision expanded. Jesus showed David dozens more stories, hurting people sitting in his services, desperate souls who'd tried reaching out, wounded sheep who'd received impersonal system responses instead of personal shepherding, a man struggling with pornography addiction given a website link, never personally followed up with, a couple whose marriage was falling apart, referred to Christian counseling, never personally walked with through crisis, a college student questioning her faith told to attend membership class, never personally discipled, a family dealing with financial crisis given information about benevolence programs, never personally helped, a woman escaping domestic violence, connected to a shelter, never personally protected or shepherded, a teenager being bullied at school encouraged to pray about it, never personally advocated for, dozens of people, hundreds of people, maybe thousands. David couldn't even know how many because he didn't know his congregation, all of them sitting in his services, hearing his inspiring messages, being part of his impressive attendance numbers, but not actually being shepherded, not known by name, not cared for personally, not experiencing what Jesus modeled, the good shepherd who knows his sheep and lays down his life for them. And Jesus said, "These are not numbers, David. These are souls, precious, valuable. Each one created in my Father's image, each one I died for, each one I entrusted to your care as a shepherd, and you've treated them as audience members for your performance rather than sheep needing care." The vision shifted again. Jesus showed David what true shepherding looked like from his own earthly ministry. David saw Jesus with individuals, stopping for one person, the woman with the bleeding issue, spending time with sinners, Zacchaeus, the woman at the well, Matthew the tax collector, noticing people others overlooked, blind Bartimaeus, the widow giving 2 coins, children being pushed away. He saw Jesus healing on the Sabbath, prioritizing people over religious rules, Jesus touching lepers, speaking to Samaritans, defending the adulteress, always seeing the individual, not the crowd, always caring for the one, not just the 99. He saw Jesus' limited earthly ministry 3 years, mostly in one region, focused on 12 disciples. Jesus could have traveled more, preached to larger crowds, built a bigger movement, but he prioritized depth over breadth, discipleship over fame, formation over numbers. And Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep by name. I call them individually. When one is lost, I leave the 99 to find the one. I lay down my life for the sheep. I don't delegate shepherding to hired hands. I don't build an empire and call it ministry. I actually know them, care for them, feed them, protect them. David, I gave you the model. Small group of disciples, personal investment, deep relationships, individual care. You could have built a church of 500 people you actually shepherded, but you wanted something bigger, more impressive, more successful by worldly standards. So you built an empire you can't shepherd, and the sheep are suffering." David felt defensive, angry even. "Lord, you also preached to thousands. The Sermon on the Mount, the feeding of the 5,000. You had large crowds, and I never prioritized crowds over individuals." Jesus interrupted. "I preached to crowds, yes, but I also stopped for one bleeding woman in the midst of a crowd pressing around me. I noticed Zacchaeus in a tree when thousands were lining the streets. I had dinner with sinners, even though it damaged my reputation. I spent most of my time with 12, not thousands. I knew them, discipled them, walked with them. That's shepherding, David, not what you're doing." The vision shifted to show David his own life. Jesus showed him the countless hours spent on sermon preparation, not to feed souls, but to deliver impressive performances. The time spent on conference speaking, building his brand more than serving the church. The focus on social media, growing followers more than making disciples. Jesus showed David his schedule over the past year. Hundreds of hours in leadership meetings, strategic planning sessions, staff development. Very impressive for a CEO. Appropriate for running a multi-million-dollar organization, but 0 hours visiting sick members. 0 hours counseling struggling believers. 0 hours personally discipling new Christians. 0 hours knowing individual sheep. David had outsourced all actual shepherding so he could focus on being a celebrity pastor. And Jesus said words that cut to David's soul. "You've turned my father's house into a business. You've made the church about production quality, crowd size, budget growth. You measure success by metrics I never gave you. You're proud of attendance numbers I don't care about. You've built something impressive to humans but worthless to me, because you forgot what I actually asked you to do. Feed my sheep." "But I do feed them," David protested. "Every Sunday. 45-minute sermons. Biblical truth. You give entertaining talks to anonymous crowds." Jesus said, "Feeding sheep is personal. It's knowing them individually, understanding their specific needs, providing what they specifically need, not generic motivation for masses. David, most of your congregation comes, hears an inspiring message, and leaves unchanged because there's no personal investment, no real discipleship, no actual shepherding. You've created a religious entertainment venue, not a hospital for souls. That's not fair," David said, tears forming. "I'm doing the best I can. I can't personally shepherd 15,000 people." "Then you shouldn't have 15,000 people," Jesus said firmly. "David, church growth isn't inherently good if it means abandoning actual shepherding. I never commanded you to build a megachurch. I commanded you to make disciples, to feed my sheep, to know them by name. You've achieved incredible success by human standards while failing at what I actually asked you to do." The vision ended. David was back in his office, on his knees, weeping. Everything he'd been proud of, the growth, the numbers, the success, The influence felt hollow now, worthless. He'd built an empire, but he'd abandoned the sheep. "I've failed you," David sobbed. "I thought I was doing what you wanted, building your church, reaching people, but I was really building my own kingdom, my own brand, my own success. And the sheep were suffering, while I was becoming famous." "Yes," Jesus said simply, "not condemnation, just truth." "How do I fix this?" David asked desperately. "The church is so big now. I can't change everything overnight. People expect the services we provide. Staff depend on their jobs. We have financial obligations. You fix it by becoming a real shepherd," Jesus said firmly. "Not a CEO, not a celebrity, a shepherd. That might mean making the church smaller. It definitely means changing your priorities. It will certainly mean you become less famous and less financially successful. But David, you have to choose. Will you build my kingdom or yours?" "Both," David said desperately. "Can't I do both? Keep the large church but add more shepherding." "You can't serve two masters," Jesus said, quoting his own words. "You can't build an empire and truly shepherd. You can't be a celebrity and know your sheep by name. You have to choose, fame or faithfulness, success or shepherding, your kingdom or mine." David was silent. Everything in him wanted to find a compromise. Keep the megachurch success, but add some pastoral care. Maintain his platform, but be more present. Have the best of both worlds. But he knew Jesus was right. The empire he'd built was incompatible with real shepherding. He'd have to choose. What would faithfulness look like? David asked quietly. "Stepping down from megachurch leadership," Jesus said. "Planting a smaller church, maybe 300 people that you can actually shepherd. Knowing your congregation by name. Doing hospital visits, personal counseling, real discipleship. Living simply so you have time for people instead of spending 80 hours a week maintaining an empire." "I'd lose my salary," David said. "My book deals, my speaking engagements, my reputation, everything I've built." "Yes," Jesus said simply. "You'd lose everything the world values, but you'd gain what I value. Faithfulness, shepherding, knowing my sheep, laying down your life for them rather than using them to build your brand." "People will call me a failure," David said, "going from 15,000 to 300. That looks like failure. By human standards," Jesus agreed, "but not by mine." "David, on Judgment Day, I won't ask about your attendance numbers or book sales. I'll ask, did you feed my sheep? Did you know them? Did you care for them? Did you lay down your life for them? You can have worldly success or my approval, not both. Choose." Jesus began to fade. "I'm going to Tyler right now, and Angela, and Margaret, and Jason, and all the other sheep you've neglected. I'm going to shepherd them, myself, since their under-shepherd abandoned them for fame. But David, you still have time to change, to become who I actually called you to be. Don't waste it maintaining an empire I never asked you to build." And he was gone, leaving David alone in his office. But not the same David who'd been reviewing attendance statistics an hour earlier. David didn't sleep that night, sat in his office until dawn, processing everything Jesus had shown him. Every justification he'd built for his megachurch model was gone. He'd seen the suffering sheep, the abandoned souls, the people treated as numbers rather than individuals precious to God. At 7 a.m., David called an emergency meeting with his executive team, his closest staff people who'd built Elevation Life with him. "I need to tell you something," David said, his voice shaking. "Jesus Christ appeared to me last night." His team looked skeptical, concerned. Was Pastor David having a breakdown? "He showed me that we've built something impressive but wrong," David continued. "We've created a megachurch empire that's excellent at Sunday production but terrible at actual shepherding. We have 15,000 people and I can't name more than a few dozen. We have systems that prevent personal care. We've prioritized growth over discipleship, and Jesus told me it's not what he asked me to build." "David," his executive pastor said carefully, "you're exhausted. The year has been demanding. Maybe you need some rest." "I'm not exhausted," David interrupted. "I'm convicted. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. And what I see is that I've been building my kingdom, not God's. I've been becoming famous instead of faithful. And it has to change." "What are you saying?" his worship pastor asked. "I'm saying I'm stepping down as senior pastor of Elevation Life Church," David said. Effective immediately. You should promote someone internal, maybe you. He nodded to the executive pastor, who can maintain what's been built. But I can't lead this anymore. It's not what God called me to do. The room erupted. David, you can't be serious. This is crazy. You're the face of this church. What about the staff? What about the budget? What about our expansion plans? I know this seems insane by worldly standards, David said, but Jesus was clear. I've become a buddy. CEO, not a shepherd. I've built an organization, not shepherded souls. And I need to return to what he actually called me to do. Which is what? His children's pastor asked. Shepherding, David said simply. Knowing my flock by name. Personal discipleship. Being present with people in suffering. I'm going to plant a small church, maybe 300 people maximum that I can actually care for. I'm going to live simply so I have time for people instead of maintaining an empire. I'm going to be faithful instead of successful. You'll lose everything, his executive pastor said. Your salary, your platform, your influence. Going from 15,000 to 300 looks like failure. By human standards, David agreed, but not by God's. And I'd rather be faithful to God and look like a failure to the world than be successful by worldly standards. And hear Jesus say, I never knew you, because I never knew his sheep. The staff didn't understand. Thought David was having a crisis. But David was resolute. He drafted his resignation letter that day, announced it to the elders that evening. They tried talking him out of it, offered sabbatical, reduced schedule, counseling. But David was firm. He was done with Megachurch ministry. On Sunday, David preached his final message at Elevation Life. He told the congregation everything, Jesus appearing, the convicted he felt, the sheep he'd neglected, the choice he was making. I've been your pastor for 18 years, David said, tears streaming. I've preached thousands of sermons. I've baptized hundreds of you. I've celebrated your successes and mourned your losses, or at least I thought I had. But the truth Jesus showed me is that I don't know most of you. You're numbers to me, attendance statistics, anonymous faces in a crowd, and that's not shepherding. That's empire building. I'm stepping down because I need to return to what Jesus actually called me to do. Know my sheep, feed my sheep, care for my sheep. I can't do that with 15,000 people. So I'm planting a small church where I can be a real shepherd instead of a celebrity pastor. The congregation was shocked. Many were confused. Some were angry, felt abandoned. Others understood. After the service, people approached David. Some thanked him for his honesty. Others accused him of being irresponsible. A few said they wanted to join his new church plant. Let me be clear, David told them. This new church won't be like Elevation Life. No impressive production, no professional worship team, no state-of-the-art facility. Just simple, biblical church where I actually know everyone's name and can care for them personally. If you're coming because you want megachurch quality in a smaller venue, don't come. Come if you want real shepherding and discipleship. 20 families said they were interested. About 60 people total. It was a start. 6 months after Jesus appeared, David was pastoring Shepherd's Way church meeting in a rented school cafeteria, averaging 120 people on Sundays. The contrast to Elevation Life was stark. No professional production. David led worship with an acoustic guitar. Sermons were shorter, more conversational, deeply biblical. The focus was relationships over programs. David knew every person by name. When someone missed a Sunday, he called them. When someone was hospitalized, he visited personally, not delegating. When someone was struggling, he met with them for coffee and prayed with them. He did discipleship groups, 8 people meeting weekly in his home, going deep in scripture and life. He trained other members to do the same. The goal was depth, not breadth. Formation, not numbers. David's salary was $45,000, barely enough to live on. He and Michelle had sold their large home and moved to a modest apartment. The kids attended public school instead of private. They cut expenses dramatically. David wrote no books, spoke at no conferences, had no social media presence, was completely unknown outside his ripard. Small congregation. By worldly standards, he looked like a failure. From megachurch pastor earning $250,000 to small church pastor earning $45,000. from 15,000 people to 120, from famous to anonymous. But David had never felt more faithful, more aligned with Jesus' call, more like an actual shepherd. Tyler's family, the suicidal teenager from Elevation Life, had joined Shepherd's Way. Tyler was doing better now. David met with him weekly, knew his struggles, walked with him through depression, was being the shepherd Tyler had needed 3 years ago. Angela, the addicted single mom, had also joined. She was 18 months sober now. David had connected her with a Christian recovery program but stayed personally involved. Visited her weekly, encouraged her, was the shepherd who knew her name and cared about her specifically. Margaret, the grieving widow, had found Shepherd's Way through a friend. She was healing. David had visited her dozens of times, knew her story, honored Robert's memory, provided the pastoral care she'd needed 3 years ago and never received. Jason, the doubting believer who'd left Christianity, had reconnected with David. They were meeting weekly to discuss hard questions, real discipleship. David didn't have all the answers, but he was present, walking with Jason through doubts, being the shepherd who invested personally. These weren't impressive numbers, 4 people out of thousands who'd been neglected at Elevation Life. But to David, they were precious. Proof that shepherding individuals mattered more than growing crowds. 1 year after Jesus appeared, David was invited to speak at a pastor's conference about church growth. The irony wasn't lost on him. They'd invited him based on his Elevation Life success, not knowing he'd resigned. David accepted the invitation, but instead of talking about growth strategies, he told his story. A year ago, I was the senior pastor of a 15,000-person megachurch. I'd written best-selling books, spoke at conferences, was successful by every worldly measure, and Jesus Christ appeared to me and told me I'd failed at what he actually asked me to do: shepherd his sheep. The room was silent. Several hundred pastors, many of them megachurch leaders or aspiring to be, listening intently. David shared everything: the vision of suffering sheep, the people he'd neglected, the choice Jesus gave him, the decision to step down and plant a small church. Today I pastor 140 people, David said. I earn $45,000. I have no platform. I'm completely unknown. By worldly standards, I'm a failure. I went from megachurch success to obscurity. But I know my sheep. I visit them in hospitals. I counsel them through struggles. I disciple them personally. I know their names, their stories, their suffering, their joys. I'm being the shepherd Jesus called me to be instead of the CEO I became. And here's what I learned: success and faithfulness aren't the same thing. You can build something hugely successful by human standards while failing at what God actually asked you to do. The American church has created a model where pastors become celebrities instead of shepherds, where we measure effectiveness by attendance numbers Jesus doesn't care about, where we prioritize crowd size over soul care. I'm not saying megachurches are inherently wrong, but I am saying that if your church is too big for you to actually know and shepherd your people, it's too big. If you've delegated all pastoral care so you can focus on preaching to crowds, you've abandoned your calling. If you can't name most of your congregation, you're not a shepherd, you're a performer. Jesus is the good shepherd. He knows his sheep by name, and he calls under-shepherds to do the same. Not to build empires, not to become famous, but to know the flock, feed the flock, care for the flock, lay down your life for the flock. I challenge you. Can you name 50 people in your congregation, not staff or donors, but regular members? Do you know their struggles? Have you visited them in suffering? Are you personally discipling anyone? If not, you might be a successful CEO, but you're not being a faithful shepherd. The message was not well received by most. Several pastors walked out. Others were offended, felt David was judging them. A few thanked him afterward but admitted they had no intention of changing their model. But about 20 pastors approached David with tears. I needed to hear this. I've been building my kingdom, not God's. I've been becoming famous instead of faithful. I need to change. 2 years after Jesus appeared, David sat in his small office at Shepherd's Way Church, nothing like his luxury office at Elevation Life. Simple desk, folding chairs, walls decorated with children's drawings from Sunday school. Shepherd's Way had grown to 180 people. David had planted the church with the commitment to cap at 300 beyond that. He'd plant another church rather than grow too large to shepherd personally. He was preparing a sermon on John 1:0, Jesus as the Good Shepherd, reading the passage with new eyes. I am the Good Shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. David thought about his congregation. He knew them. Marcus, struggling with unemployment. Katie, grieving her miscarriage. The Johnson family, navigating their son's autism diagnosis. Sarah, battling cancer. Tom, wrestling with same-sex attraction. Rebecca, leaving an abusive marriage. He knew them by name, knew their stories, was walking with them through suffering, being present in crisis, doing the actual work of shepherding. It wasn't impressive, wouldn't make headlines, wouldn't build his brand, but it was faithful. It was what Jesus had called him to do. His phone rang. A former staff member from Elevation Life. David, I wanted to update you. Elevation Life's attendance has declined to 11,000. The executive pastor who replaced you hasn't been able to maintain growth. The elders are starting to question the megachurch model. Some are asking if we should focus more on shepherding and less on production. David felt no satisfaction in the decline, just sadness for the sheep who were still not being truly shepherded. Tell them to read John 10, David said, and to ask Jesus what he wants, not what will grow a crowd. The Good Shepherd model isn't about numbers, it's about knowing the sheep. After the call, David prayed for Elevation Life, for the new senior pastor, for the staff, for the thousands of people who still weren't being truly shepherded. He prayed they'd discover what he'd learned, that God measures success by faithfulness, not attendance, by shepherding, not celebrity, by knowing the sheep, not growing the crowd. That evening, David had dinner with Tyler, the once suicidal teenager who was now thriving. Tyler had recently decided to pursue pastoral ministry, wanted to be the kind of shepherd David had become. What's the most important thing I need to know about being a pastor? Tyler asked. David thought carefully. That you're a shepherd, not a celebrity. Your calling is to know the sheep, feed the sheep, care for the sheep, protect the sheep, not to build an impressive ministry or become famous. Jesus doesn't care about your attendance numbers. He cares about whether you know his sheep and they know you. Even if it means staying small? Tyler asked. Especially if it means staying small, David said. Better to be a faithful shepherd of a small flock than a negligent celebrity over a large crowd. Jesus was clear about that. I learned it the hard way. But you can learn from my mistakes. Choose faithfulness over fame, every time. They finished dinner and David drove home, saw the lights on in his modest apartment where Michelle was waiting. His life was so different than it had been 2 years ago. Smaller, simpler, less impressive, but infinitely more faithful. And for the first time in years, David felt peace, not the pride of success, the peace of obedience, of being aligned with Jesus's actual calling, of being a real shepherd instead of a famous pretender. He'd lost everything the world valued and gained everything God valued. It was the best trade he'd ever made. The American megachurch model has created thousands of pastors who are excellent CEOs but terrible shepherds, who can grow crowds but can't disciple individuals, who preach inspiring messages but don't know their people by name, who've turned church into entertainment and pastoral ministry into celebrity. This isn't universally true. Some megachurch pastors genuinely try to maintain shepherding, but the model makes it nearly impossible. You simply cannot shepherd 10,000 people personally. The bigger the church, the more you must delegate actual pastoral care and focus on preaching and vision casting. And somewhere along the way, we decided that was acceptable. That pastors could be professional speakers who never visit the sick, never counsel the struggling, never personally disciple believers. As long as attendance grows and budgets increase, we call it successful ministry. But Jesus never measured ministry success by crowd size. He measured it by faithfulness to the calling. Shepherd my sheep, feed them, know them, care for them, lay down your life for them. The Good Shepherd knew his sheep by name, not just the healthy, wealthy, influential sheep. All the sheep, the weak, the wounded, the wandering. He noticed when one was missing and left the 99 to find it. That's the model Jesus gave. Small group of disciples he invested in deeply. Personal relationships, individual care. Knowing them so well, he could predict Peter's denial and provide exactly what each disciple needed. To megachurch pastors and those aspiring to be, can you name 50 people in your congregation? Do you know their struggles? Have you visited them personally in suffering? Are you discipling anyone individually? If not, you might be a successful CEO, but you're not being a faithful shepherd. And here's the uncomfortable question. Is it possible your church is too big? That you've built something impressive but incompatible with real shepherding? That you need to make a choice, continue growing your empire, or actually shepherd the flock? To church members at megachurches, does your pastor know your name? If you were in crisis, would he personally respond, or would you be routed to a department? Are you being personally discipled or just consuming content? Is your church a community or an audience? If you're anonymous in your church, if you could disappear and no one would notice, if you're just a face in the crowd, you're not being shepherded, you're being entertained, and you deserve better. To small church pastors who feel like failures compared to megachurch success, you're not failing. If you know your people, if you visit them in suffering, if you're personally discipling believers, if you're being the shepherd Jesus called you to be, you're succeeding by the only metrics that matter. Don't let the megachurch model make you feel inadequate. Faithfulness matters more than fame. The church doesn't need more celebrity pastors with impressive platforms. It needs faithful shepherds who know the sheep, who feed the sheep, who care for the sheep, who lay down their lives for the sheep. Jesus is the good shepherd, and he calls under-shepherds to follow his model, not to build empires, but to shepherd souls. Choose faithfulness, even if it means staying small, even if it means becoming unknown, even if it means losing everything the world values. Because on Judgment Day, Jesus won't ask about your attendance numbers. He'll ask, did you feed my sheep? Did you know them? Did you care for them? Make sure your answer is yes.
Subscribe to Tales of God's Grace for more true miracles and stories of redemption. Your support helps us reach and restore families around the world. Don't forget to tag a friend and share this video, so together we can spread faith, love, and healing where it's needed most.